Hey there! I thought I'd bring you another tarot spread that I use and really enjoy. It's quite common in the pagan and witchy community to consult some divinatory tool, such as the tarot, before going forward with a spell or ritual. But personally, I also like consulting the tarot when designing spells and rituals, and this is a spread that I use to do that. There are a number of reasons why you might want to do the same sort of thing. I, for instance, will use it to draw inspiration in the construction of my spells. I like to incorporate new things very regularly, and I find that the tarot is an excellent tool for coming up with new ideas, new components, new actions, new behaviors. I also think it can be really handy in helping you determine where exactly to focus your energies. Because although you may know what sort of outcome you're looking for, you don't necessarily know the most direct or useful path to take to get there. I personally subscribe to the idea that every possible outcome has a lever that is ideal to use and whose placement can really help shift things in the direction of the outcome you want. And I think that at times it's not always clear what that lever really is. It may have something to do with the thing itself you're working towards. It may be related to your particular perceptions of that thing, or it may be some more general or environmental factor that will come to bear on the thing you're trying to do. And this 3x3 spread is really designed to explore these different things and help you build the ideal spell or ritual. Holy shit, my sink. So noisy. So as I just noted, this spread is designed as a 3x3 grid, with each column pertaining to a particular area, and each row of cards representing a particular positional meaning. The first column is entirely to do with the subject of your spell or ritual. So if we take the example of a house hunting spell that you're doing for yourself, well, in that case, you are the subject of the spell, you and the house. The second row pertains to your environment or environmental influences on the efficacy of the spell, things you need to take into account regarding your temporal or geographic or relationship surroundings. Finally, the third column is all about the caster. So if you're the one creating this spell, you would be the caster. Now, of course, you'll note that in many cases, the subject of the spell and the caster of the spell will be the same person. But that doesn't mean that those two columns represent the same thing. One is really talking about you as the individual being influenced. That is the subject's column. The caster's column, by contrast, really speaks to how to improve the efficacy of your spellcraft as the person who is actually casting the spell. And so the advice you receive from these two columns can be wildly different, even though they both represent the same individual, because they represent you in two different roles. And the sorts of things that may matter to you in those two different roles or influence your behavior in those two different roles can be quite different. Now, horizontally across the rows, we have cards that represent the barrier to the subject, the main barrier in your environment, and the main barrier as the caster. The second row represents advice regarding that barrier, regarding overcoming it. And the last row, which I think is really quite fun, although you could omit it if you don't feel like it fits your practice or the particular sort of ritual you'll be engaging in. Well, that last row provides advice regarding what actual tangible action or object you should incorporate into the spell itself. And it is informed by the advice you received in the second row. So to give you an idea of how this spread works in action, let's go back to that example of house hunting. So in the first row, what we see is that the main barrier facing the subject of this house hunt, namely you, is that you have perhaps not adequately considered what your actual needs are, what you're looking for, perhaps even how this move will influence yourself and your family. Whether the move is necessary or desired, this card suggests to me that the actual process of hunting for this house is being hindered by a lack of consideration regarding some aspect of the process. Perhaps you've been fairly superficial in your considerations because it all seems overwhelming, or because you're unclear on what it is you need to achieve, what it is you really want. And so a major focus of your spell should be alleviating this barrier that exists within the house hunter themselves. The second card in this column, the Eight of Coins, represents the advice preferred to aid with overcoming that barrier, particularly within the context of the spell. And here I might suggest that part of the key is in revisiting these ideas regularly and allowing your previous contemplation to inform your next, approaching it in a stepwise fashion rather than all at once, which can indeed be overwhelming. A conscientious, planned, list-wise approach may therefore be just what the doctor ordered to overcome this barrier in the subject. At this point in the read, I would move to the second column. And here, in the environmental column, I could interpret the Fool reversed as a suggestion that perhaps one of the environmental barriers regarding finding the house is that you're simply not going far enough afield in your considerations. This could be a reference to geography, like considering neighborhoods that hadn't been considered before. Or it may refer to the sort of layout you want, the sort of design or style of the house, any aspect of your house hunt that has been immediately limited in a sort of knee-jerk fashion, and which is therefore shrinking the pool of options that you actually have to consider. The advice within this column, the Hanged Man, may ask that you really consider which of those details of geography, style, or what have you may in fact be worth giving up in order to gain potentially an even better fit for yourself and your family. There may be components or details about every home you've lived in that you've just become used to and you think you're deeply attached to or really need that might not actually be necessary and may be holding your process back. And since realistically it can be very difficult to find literally everything we want in a house in a single place, here's the time you need to do some soul searching in order to figure out what you can let go of. Finally, within the Casters column, the barrier is represented by the King of Pentacles, which may reflect that a major hindrance of pulling off this spell might find its genesis in the fact that you're not grounding the spell in the material realm by introducing actual tangible components. Since the spell is focused on finding a house, construction, a very material sort of thing, a very material goal, incorporating that materiality into the ritual itself may help translate your intention in a way that is beneficial. Manifesting those intellectual components that you're trying to bring to bear on this problem in tangible form. As far as advice for the caster, we have the Moon. And in this position, this card would speak to me of the suggestion to go back, maybe look at past workings, and draw inspiration from some of those first naive, instinctual things that you did during spell work that really helped connect you to intention. Allow your history to inform you regarding the actual construction of this spell. Next, I would read the caster's component, the item or action you can use to make the caster more efficacious, because I do use the interpretation of this card to inform the last two cards of both the subjects and the environmental columns. And with the Knight of Pentacles in this position, which I read as a fusion of fire and earth, I would conclude that my best means of moving forward, a key component of the spell, which will aid my efficacy as the caster, would be the construction of a tool or physical ritual component into which I can channel my intentions and my energies and desires. And with this theme of construction and physical tool usage, the spell component I would include in order to overcome the subject barrier would be something, some object, whose purpose or use involves linking ideas, stringing things together, building off of what came before. while in the environmental column, I would want to include some fiery component, something deeply related to the element of fire, in order to help fuel that inspiration, adventurousness, that willingness to try something new that is a main environmental barrier. And looking back at the moon, I would personally be inclined to maybe really revisit some of the staples of my early practice, like candle and cord magic, wherein that cord can be used to chain concepts and considerations together in order to help the subject overcome those barriers. And perhaps whenever those concepts occur that I realize are artificially limiting the scope of my search, I would tie a knot for those and then burn that knot off. And in so doing, fuse the material components of each of these columns into their own little mini ritual tool that I can focus my energies into and use to produce an effective little bit of magic that will help me in my search. So that's one of my favorite ways to use tarot to help me in designing spells. I hope you found it enjoyable and useful, and that it helps you out as much as it's helped me. As ever, I welcome comments, questions, discussion of any sort, and until next time, I hope you have a fantastic day.